All right, let's talk about the keys to your cloud kingdom. I mean, what are the fundamental rules for keeping your stuff safe in AWS? Now, don't worry, this isn't going to be some dry technical manual. Think of it more as your guide to really understanding your role in this whole cloud security landscape. So let's dive in.
So, it really boils down to this one simple question. When you move your stuff to the cloud, who's really in charge of keeping it secure? Is it the cloud provider, AWS in this case, or is it you? And you know what? The answer? Well, it's not quite as simple as you might think.
See, the thing is, it's not an either-or situation. The truth is, cloud security is actually a partnership. And AWS has a name for this whole idea. They call it the shared responsibility model. So let's unpack what that really means.
Okay, so to make this super simple, let's use an analogy. I want you to picture the cloud, specifically AWS, as this high-tech, incredibly secure apartment building, right? They've built the reinforced concrete walls, they've installed all the security cameras, they've hired the guards for the front desk. They take care of the entire property. And you? Well, you're the tenant who's just moved in. Your apartment is your own little space inside that cloud.
And this right here, this breaks it down perfectly. You've got two sides of the coin. On one side, AWS's responsibility, what they call security of the cloud. That's their job. They're handling the building itself. The physical data centers, the global network, all the core services that everything runs on. They make sure the foundation is rock solid. But then on the other side, that's your responsibility. Security in the cloud. And that's all you. You're in charge of everything inside your apartment. Your data, your applications, and, maybe most importantly, who gets a key.
Okay, so you're in charge of your apartment now. You've got to have a way to manage the locks and hand out the keys, right? Well, in the AWS world, the main tool you're going to use for this is something called IAM.
IAM. That stands for Identity and Access Management. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the service that lets you, the administrator, securely control who gets access to your AWS resources. So, going back to our analogy, it's basically your digital locksmith and your key management system, all rolled into one.
So, IAM really breaks down access control into two core functions, two simple steps. First up is authentication. This is all about confirming someone is who they say they are. It's like showing your ID to the security guard at the front desk. Simple enough. But once they know who you are, the second step kicks in, authorization. This is where we decide what that person is actually allowed to do. Does their key only open their own apartment? Or does it open the gym, the pool, or maybe even the entire building?
All right, so to control access, you first have to define who you're talking about, right? The who. In IAM, we call these identities. And that can be people, it can be applications, basically anything that's going to interact with your stuff in AWS.
And you've got a few different types of these identities to work with. You've got an IAM user, which is usually for a single person or maybe an application. Then you have an IAM group, which is just what it sounds like, a collection of users. This is super handy for managing permissions for, like, your whole dev team in one go. And then there's an IAM role, which is a special kind of identity with temporary keys, often used by applications or services to talk to each other. But I want you to pay close attention to that last one, the AWS account root user. This thing is the master key. It's the key that opens every single door in the entire building. So here's a huge warning, a big takeaway. You need to lock this identity away and pretty much never, ever use it for everyday tasks. Seriously.
So, we figured out the who. Now let's talk about the what. What are these people and applications actually allowed to do once they get inside your account? And that's where something called an IAM policy comes into play. A policy is basically a document, a JSON file, that's like the official rulebook. It formally states the permissions. It defines exactly what actions an identity can or cannot perform on which specific AWS resources. So you could have a rule that says, user Jane is allowed to read from database alpha, and that's it, nothing else. It gets incredibly specific.
And this brings us to an absolutely critical point about how AWS security works. By default, when you create a new user or a new role, it has no permissions, none. It can do absolutely nothing. This is what we call a zero-trust starting point. Every single door is locked by default, and it's up to you to explicitly grant permission for every single thing you want them to do.
So the whole mechanism is actually pretty straightforward. You grant access that creating these policies, those are the rules, and then you attach those rules to your identities, the people or the services. That's really it. An identity, a user, a group, a role, only has the powers that you explicitly give it. It's a really powerful way to control things.
Okay,
So we've got the building, we've got the keys, we've got the rule book. Now let's bring this all together and talk about how you can really master your security.
And if there is one single thing you take away from all of this, let it be this. The golden rule of cloud security is the principle of least privilege. This is the absolute cornerstone of doing security right. It's not a suggestion, it's non-negotiable.
And that principle leads us directly to these key best practices. First off, you've got to apply those least privilege permissions. I mean, grant only the bare minimum permissions required for someone to do their job. Don't hand out a master key when a key to just one room will do, right? This limits the damage if an account ever gets compromised. Second, you have to use multi-factor authentication, or MFA. Passwords alone just don't cut it anymore. An extra layer of security is crucial. Third, set up activity logging. Use a service like AWS CloudTrail to keep a record of who is doing what in your account. That way you have an audit trail if you ever need it. And finally, encrypt your data. Protect it both when it's just sitting there and when it's moving across the network. It's your last line of defense.
So we'll leave you with this last thought to chew on. Security. It isn't a set it and forget it kind of thing. It's a constant balancing act. As you're building and innovating in the cloud, you're always going to be weighing the need for perfect security against the need to move fast and make things accessible. And so the real question for you is, how are you going to strike that balance inside your own cloud kingdom?